Hello, today I'm going to be talking about how to make a baguette. I'm going to go through the whole process from the ingredients all the way to when the bread is out of the oven and cooling. Uh, First thing I'm going to talk about is all the ingredients. And in simple lean dough, like a baguette, you're only going to have four ingredients. There's the flour, there's salt, there's water, and then there's yeast. So all these simple ingredients come together to make an amazing product, which is bread. We all love bread. So flour is really the structure of the bread. It provides food for the yeast. Um, Salt controls the fermentation and also brings flavor to it. Water brings everything together and it also activates the yeast. And the yeast is what makes the bread rise. It also gives a lot of the flavors that we relate to bread. Um, so these are all essential to the bread making process. You can't have bread without one, without even taking away one of them will just make the whole process fail. So another important step is scaling. So scaling is the first thing you're going to do in the bread making process. Um, so generally in baking, you're not going to just kind of throw ingredients until it's what you look like. You follow a formula with proportions that relate to the bread you're making. So a baguette is a pretty soft dough with a medium hydration um, and almost every bread starts with a pre-ferment. So I'm going to talk about the 5 different pre-ferments that you can have in the bread making process. There's the biga, which is a relatively low hydration. It takes around 6 to 16 hours. It brings a mildly acidic taste to it. It's very versatile. It can be used in almost any bread. Next we have the sponge, which is very low hydration pre-ferment, only 60%. It usually has a short fermentation time, as little as 30 minutes. It's used in many sweet doughs where gluten isn't formed as easily because of the addition of fat and sugars, so it helps start that process. And it has a sweet flavor because it doesn't really develop, whereas other pre-ferments that last, hours or overnight, the yeast develops flavors, but not in the case of the sponge. Next we have the pâte fermentée, also known as the old dough. This is a very effective way in production of just taking some of a dough that you're already making and just saving it for the next day, and just using it as a pre-ferment in the next dough. So what you do is you just take a piece of dough and you just put it in the refrigerator overnight or even 2 nights for a cold fermentation. It will be a bit acidic because it is staying overnight and the yeast is fermenting longer. Again, it's very versatile. You see it a lot in bakeries. Next we have the levain. It's used for just sourdoughs, just because it's made with a sourdough starter or wild yeast. It has a very acidic profile, which is hence the name sourdough. It can be stiff or liquid, depending on the dough you're making, and it's also very versatile. And lastly, we have the poulish. This is the one that we will be using with a baguette. You see this, it's widely used for baguettes. It has 100% hydration. It's around 6 to 16 hours for fermentation. It has a lactic flavor with nutty flavors, and like I said, it's going to be used for the baguettes that we're making today. Next up, we have the mixing processes. So there's 3 different mixing methods. There's the short, the improved, and the intensive. So the short dough is what we normally want to see in a bread making process. It can either be hand mixed or only first speed on a machine, on a mixer. These doughs have a very long fermentation time because generally the gluten isn't developed or overdeveloped. It will yield a superior crumb because the gluten isn't being destroyed and the yeast is really being able to expand and create a lot of air bubbles. The flavor is also much more developed because of the longer fermentation time. The yeast has more time to develop those organic acids and the alcohol flavors that we associate with bread. The next we have is the improved method, which starts with on first speed just to incorporate all the ingredients, and then we go to second speed just to develop the gluten just enough. Usually the improved method will also be accompanied with folding the dough, which I'll talk about later. It usually has a medium fermentation time because it's right in the middle. It has usually a full gluten development. It's used in most bakeries today. It's very common. It's also for efficient production. Lastly, we have the intensive mix, which starts on first speed just to incorporate the dough, just like the improved method. But then we go to second speed, and it can go 4 to 6 minutes, and it's basically over developing the gluten. So this makes it so it's very quick to ferment. The gas from the yeast gets trapped very easily, and it can go very fast. And this was found out when industrial mixers came into the bakery scene, and it was really the fall of bread because flavors just went out the door, and because people wanted their bread, they wanted it cheap and fast, and the bakeries that were using the intensive mixing method could produce bread at higher volumes and much faster than the old-fashioned bakeries. However, the flavors just were absolutely different, very bland, not a baguette you'd want. So ideally, a short mixing method would be the best, but usually in a bakery you'd see the improved just because it doesn't take as long and it's a lot less effort while keeping the quality of the product up high. So after the mixing method, you go into the bulk fermentation. So this is when the yeast activates, and you start with the dough that's very small, and then it rises, and all that yeast is it's converting water and sugar into CO2 gas and alcohols. This gas expands and gets trapped into the gluten, and during this process, like I mentioned before, there's folding. So when you're folding a dough, it simply just means you're taking part of the dough, you're folding it in onto itself, and then you rearrange it so it can start making more gases. So when you're folding, you're expelling the CO2 gas, you're strengthening the dough and the gluten in the dough, and you're evening the temperature of the dough to make sure you have an even fermentation. So after the bulk fermentation, we go into dividing and pre-shaping. So when you're dividing the dough, you want to make sure you're being very even with your cuts. You don't want too many scraps to be put in the dough. So you're just taking the big mass of dough and generally cutting it into strips and then into the cubes that you want. For a baguette, we're talking about around 400 grams. And you take those squares of dough, and you want them to be generally square or rectangular, because every step from now until baking will affect the final shape of your baguette. So I don't have any dough with me, sadly, but I have this representation of my dough. So this is a divided piece of dough, hopefully around 400 grams. And to pre-shape your dough, you're just going to take it. We generally call this the north-south, and then this will be the east-west. So the longer side will be facing north-south, and you're just going to take it and take your hands, and you're going to pull the dough up, and you're going to take it about 1/3, and you're just going to press it in with your fingers, like there. Obviously this is paper, so it won't stay, but the next step would just be taking your hands again, pulling that dough over, pressing down with your hands very lightly, and this would be your pre-shape. So now you'd divide all the dough, you'd pre-shape all the dough, and it would go onto a floured board, and then it will start its bench rest. So what's happening here, it's generally around 20 minutes to 30 minutes. For a baguette, it's going to be 20 minutes. And you're just letting the gluten kind of relax, because the next step will be shaping, and it's much better if the dough is very extensible instead of very elastic. You want it to be able to stretch, and you don't want it to pull back on you. So it's very important to do this bench rest. After the bench rest, we move into shaping the baguette. Again, I don't have any dough, but I do have this to represent it. So you're going to take the pre-shaped dough out, you're going to put it on a floured surface, and you're going to degas it, hit it, get all the bubbles out, and then you're generally going to shake it off a little bit and bring it to a space on your table that has no flour on it, because for this next process you don't want any excess flour on it. So you start with the dough, it's just been pounded down. You're going to take one hand, put it on top of the dough, and you're going to put your thumb probably around 1/3 of the way to the top. And with your hand, you're going to take the dough from the top of it, and you're going to pull it towards you. And you want it to go about 1/3 of the way, or about 1 inch to 1.5 inches to the end. So you do that, and with your other hand, you're going to pound with right here, right around the palm of your hand. So you put your thumb in, you pull the dough over, and then with your other hand, you're going to lightly hit it down. Just want to barely create the seal there, and then you're going to take it. You're going to pick it up from the middle, and this, got to use your imagination, but you're going to stretch the dough out a little bit, and you just want to get it as close to that baguette length before we actually roll it out. So you're going to take it, flip it over, and again we're going to repeat this process. However, instead of going 1/3 the length, we're going to make it so the seam is going to be down, right down the middle. And again, it's the same thing. Put my thumb in. With my hand, I'm going to pull the dough over. And with my right hand, I'm going to lightly tamp down the dough. So then I'll have it just like this. And yet again, we're going to stretch a little bit to get it to that nice long length that a baguette is. And then you're going to take the dough, yet again, thumb right on the seam, and with your hand you're going to grab the dough, bring it completely over, and it's going to come to the other side of the dough. And this is where you get to get your anchor out a little bit, and you're going to pound down the dough, and you're going to create that seam. You can go all the way down the baguette, and then you'll be left with a baguette just like this. And you're going to have the seam down. You're going to transfer this to a couche lined with some flour. And that's when you're going to start your final proof. So this, for a baguette, we're going to look at for about an hour to proof. It can vary with different breads. And this is just letting that final little bit of yeast create the gas right before it goes into the oven. Again, you're developing the flavors, getting more of that lactic profile that I was talking about with the pre-ferments. And for a final proof, depending on the dough, we're looking for about 75 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, a very high humidity because we don't want the dough to crust over before it bakes. And like I said, for a baguette, we're looking at about an hour for their final proof, but some doughs can proof as little as 45 minutes or even overnight. So now that we've finished our final proof, we're about to move on to baking, but before we do, we have to focus on scoring our baguettes. So it's very important. This is a very crucial stage where if you incorrectly score your baguettes, you're going to release all the CO2 gas that we've been creating this whole time, that we've been working very hard to get. And if you score it incorrectly, all that will escape and you'll get a very flat bread and it won't rise to its expected size. So a few tips for scoring. First thing is you're going to need a lamb, and you're going to want to cut the baguette at around a 45-degree angle. So if you cut straight up and down, or 9 degrees, that's when all the gas will be released from the dough, and you'll have up here as a representation of cutting at 9 degrees. The loaf will just kind of split open and all the gas will come out and it won't rise at all. So at a 45-degree angle here, you're going into the dough and you're putting a place where the dough can actually rise up out of the bread and all that CO2 can expand up. Again, we want the baguette to look very good because, you know, we're going to be eating it or we're going to be selling it, and we want our food to look as good as it tastes. So to score, you take your baguette, and this will represent my lamb and my final proofed baguette, and you'll take from the top, you'll pinch it, and you'll come in, and don't want to think of it more as a vertical, as a slanted cut, but more a straight cut down. So you pinch it, and you're going to make the incision at 45 degrees, almost straight down, and this should be around 3 inches. Then you're going to overlap about 1 inch, and again 45 degrees, and continue that down the length of the baguette. And while you're doing this, you want your hand to be following along with the lamb, so you're steadying the baguette. This will prevent what we call alligator teeth from forming, which is not the worst thing, but it is hard to eat and you can cut your mouth while doing it. So after scoring, we're going to put this in the oven. So we move on to the baking stage. So immediately once it goes into the oven, we're going to add steam to the equation, and this is going to help with the oven spring. So in the oven spring, what's happening is all that CO2 gas that the yeast created is expanding, and expanding very rapidly. So what the steam does is it prevents the crust from forming. This gives it the chance for the CO2 gas to expand before the bread crusts over, and it will just kind of explode out and you won't get that lift that you want. Steam also gives a nice shine to the bread and enhances the crust color. And then around when the bread is 212 degrees, you're going to see the Maillard reaction happen. So what's happening here is the sugars are breaking down, but it's not caramelization. It's the Maillard reaction because there's proteins present in the baguette, and while the sugars are breaking down, you're getting this beautiful golden brown color, and it's going to bring a lot of flavor to the baguette, and it's going to make the baguette look amazing. So your baguettes just came out of the oven. They should look a little like this, with a very dark golden brown color. The score marks that you made here to indicate that there was a good score mark, you'll have these ears here, which shows that you did it at a 45-degree angle. You have nice even scores, and you can see here that it was done very correctly. So you might want to take a bite into it right out of the oven where it's nice and warm, but you won't get as many of the flavors that you will if you wait for it to cool. If you just cut into it, all the flavors will kind of escape out of the air, and you won't get the proper baguette flavor that you want. when you're storing the baguette, you don't want to wrap it in plastic because the water will condense on the plastic and it will make the crumbs soggy and it won't be pleasant to eat after that. So you want to store it into a brown bag for future eating. And thank you so much for watching, and hope you make some great baguettes after this. Thanks.